Welcome, everyone. I'm Robert Klitzman. I'm a professor of psychiatry here at Columbia and the director of the Masters of Bioethics program. And we're delighted to welcome you to our session on 50 years after the declassification of homosexuality from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association. Where have we been? Where are we now? And where are we going? 50 years ago, the decision by the APA was monumental, and it's had momentous impacts on American healthcare as well as our culture and society more broadly. But the issues at stake in having an election decide what should and should not be considered a disorder raise many ethical, legal, social, and political questions that remain with us, particularly as the rights of LGBT individuals, in particular transgender individuals, is very much under threat as we speak. We're delighted to have a panel of experts this evening exploring these challenges, both past and ongoing. With us is Julie Sandler, who recently produced a documentary called Cure that examines the 50th anniversary and the issues that occurred back then. We also have Ron Bayer, who is a professor of sociomedical sciences here at Columbia University and wrote a book about the topic, about the historical events that occurred 50 years ago. We have Eric Marcus, and he is the director of Making Gay History, and he has interviews with individuals involved in the time that he'll be sharing with us. We have Tia Powell, who is a professor of epidemiology and psychiatry at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine and is a co-founder of Slow Code Media. Barbra Rothschild, who's a lecturer in bioethics here at Columbia University. And with that, we will get started. So, Julie, do you want to show us the clip and talk about it for a moment?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with all of you. My name is Julie Sandler, and I'm the impact producer for the documentary Cured. I'm really excited to be here and share more about this film with you. To give you a sense of the story, I'm just going to play the short 2-minute trailer, and then I'll talk a bit more about it.
If you were gay in those days, you were diagnosed as suffering from a mental disorder. Like so many people in my generation, I went to psychoanalysis to be cured.
These are some of the methods doctors employ to cure homosexuality: electroshock therapy, hysterectomies on lesbians, castrations of gay men.
People used psychiatry as a reason to discriminate. Apart from the discrimination against us, it gave us a horrible image of ourselves.
In the early 1970s, there was this growing rebellion against psychiatry, and we wanted to remove homosexuality from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual.
The body of knowledge which claims sickness for homosexuality has to be challenged.
We could not expect our civil rights as long as we were burdened with the sickness label.
Maybe it makes you feel good to be able to say that we are sick. Does it make you feel good?
The body of medical evidence suggests that it is a mental aberration.
There were so many of us that were at the same point. Enough is enough. We're not going to take it anymore. Period.
A number of psychiatrists talked about, why don't we organize, we can make an impact. John Fryer took a step as being the first psychiatrist to say, I'm a gay person, but no one recognized him. He represented all the people who were hiding and invisible.
The effect was electric.
At psychiatric annual meetings, there were demonstrations, if not in fact riots. Ron Gold's a gay activist. He got up there and he yelled out, "Stop it, you're making me sick." I told him in my speech, you don't have the right to decide that perfectly happy people are sick.
This fight was the most important moment in gay liberation history.
All right, so as you can see, the film combines testimony from a mix of insiders who are working directly within the American Psychiatric Association to effect change, and also outside activists who are fighting in the streets and making their voices heard that way. To give you some background on our distribution, Cured was initially released at a virtual film festival in August of 2020. Following that release, the film was screened at dozens of additional film festivals, both nationally and internationally. The documentary made its broadcast premiere in the United States in October of 2021 when it was featured on PBS as a part of the acclaimed Showcase Independent Lens. The film attracted about 1.5 million viewers during that national broadcast, and it additionally has been broadcast internationally in Sweden, Austria, the UK, Poland, Italy, and more. The film has also received numerous accolades, including an Emmy nomination in 2022. In the last few years, we've also been busy with our outreach and engagement campaign. We've hosted over 300 screenings of the film in partnership with nonprofit organizations, workplaces, universities, LGBTQ groups, mental health orgs, and more. Our outreach and engagement campaign is ongoing, so if you are affiliated with an organization that might be interested in hosting a screening, you can feel free to reach out to us. You can send us an email at info@cureddocumentary.com, or you can fill out the Contact Us form on our website, which is cureddocumentary.com. And I will paste those details in the chat so you can see all that information directly. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the event.
Great. Thank you so much. And we're going to turn now to Ron. Ron, you know a lot about the topic of what was involved with the process at the APA. What was the background? You came to this with a certain set of interests. Do you want to fill us in on some of that?
Sure. So as Bob had suggested, a number of years ago, I wrote a book called Homosexuality in American Psychiatry, The Politics of Diagnosis. How did I get there? From the mid-1970s, I spent years studying the effort to medicalize drug use and addiction, which was criminalized in every state. It was a movement that called upon science and politically liberal. It was a politically liberal challenge to the prevailing practice over the prior 7 decades. I was a staff member at the Hastings Center, a bioethics research institute, and the president, Willard Galen, a psychoanalyst who had a significant practice of gay men seeking to change their sexual orientation. He said to me that I might find it interesting, this was about 1980, to study the decision of the American Psychiatric Association to declassify homosexuality as a disease. I must admit that I knew nothing about the issue, but it sounded like an important intellectual challenge. Galen knew many of the psychiatric actors on both sides of the controversy, so he made my entry into the debate kind of easy. I set out my goal. It was to understand how and why a social movement led by those who had been stigmatized and whose behavior was criminalized across the nation had been able to launch a successful effort. But here, the remarkable fact was that the medicalization that stood as the target of radical challenge, so different from what I had been studying in the study of addiction, where medicalization was a liberating force. It was clear that the understanding of homosexuality as a clinical disorder had been become an orthodoxy in American psychiatry. Worth noting, however, was the fact that in a very early year, Sigmund Freud wrote something that was quite remarkable. An American woman had written to Freud about her son, who was clearly gay, and asking if psychoanalysis could change him. He wrote back to her, "Homosexuality is assuredly no advantage, but is nothing to be ashamed of, no vice, no degradation. It cannot be classified as an illness." What analysis can do for your son runs in a different line. If he is unhappy, neurotic, torn by conflicts, inhibited in his social life, analysis may bring to him harmony, peace of mind, full efficiency, whether or not he remains homosexual or not. It's an amazing thing to refer back to back then. When I started my study, it was what then was the context in which the gay struggle took hold, emerged, and was successful. The women's movement that challenged the subordination of women broadly within medicine and captured by the volume our bodies ourselves, the deep challenge to American racism in the American Civil Rights Movement in the 1970s, the struggle against the authoritarian that permeated compulsory hospitalization of those with mental illnesses, and indeed an anti-psychiatry movement led by Thomas Szasz, who wrote the book Mental Illness as an Illness. The emergence of bioethics, which embraced a deep challenge to paternalism of medicine, was also involved. So it is with that context that the voice of gay men was amplified and understood, that it could, I think, never have occurred in an unauthorized moment, a socially conservative context. The message was addressed to psychiatrists and analysts who more or so had seen themselves as the protectors of their patients who had been criminalized, who had been stigmatized, and they want to protect them. It was these psychiatrists who saw themselves as protectors, and yet suddenly they saw themselves as the enemies, as the perpetrators of of inequality. And it's amazing how they suffered with that experience. This then was the context in which it became necessary for psychiatrists to confront the question, how and why do we diagnose? What are the criteria should we use in behaviors as desires and as classifications as pathological? It was that question that seized the attention of Robert Spitzer, a Columbia University psychiatrist who chairs the American Psychiatric Association's nomenclature committee, and who would become a central figure within the American Psychiatric Association to press for declassification. It was this encounter that compelled Spitzer to address a problem broader than the issue raised by gay activists, and led him to lead to a rethinking of how to classify disease for American psychiatry. Thank you.
Well, that was great, Ron. Thank you. Ron was very much there, and clearly it's an issue of what in general, by the way, do we medicalize? What do we not medicalize? What does that mean? What are the pros and cons? Eric, you've conducted some wonderful interviews of people who were there on the front lines. You want to tell us about them and maybe share some of them with us?
Yeah, it was fun seeing just the trailer that Julie showed us of the documentary, because the clips I'm going to share with you this evening, just a handful, are of people who are featured in the film. Barbara Giddings, Frank Kameny, and Barbara Giddings' life partner, Kayla Husin. What struck me in interviewing them, and I interviewed more than 100 people for the 2 editions of my book, Making Gay History, which is now a podcast, for which we've produced more than 100 episodes over the last 9 years. What struck me in interviewing Barbara Giddings and Kayla Husin and Frank Kameny back in 1989 was that they believed they were right, and all of you, Robert, all the psychiatrists were wrong. And I wondered how they came to think that. Now, Frank Kameny was a formidable figure, and I'm going to have Katie play a clip of Frank, and you'll hear how formidable he was. And he and Barbara and Kay were instrumental fighting from the outside to get homosexuality removed from the list of mental illnesses. So, Katie, can you first play that first clip, number 1?
Now, the movement of those days, and I say this next
not critically and not necessarily derogatorily, because it was a very, very, very different era. And we were sick, we were sinners, we were perverts. You have your long litany of pejoratives. There was absolutely nothing whatsoever which anybody heard at any time, anywhere at all, which was other than negative. Nothing. And so the movement was predictably, in retrospect, responded accordingly, and that was the nature of the movement.
So people were frightened they'd...
So, I mean, you can hear Frank's voice, and he was sure that he was right and the world was wrong. Now, I grew up in the 1970s, and I just assumed I was wrong and the world was right. So how do you come into the world thinking that who you are, which is so contrary to what the larger society says is right, how do you come to the decision that you're right, they're wrong, and I'm going to fight the world and change the world? Barbara Giddings worked with Frank Kameny. So Frank founded an organization called the Mattachine Society of Washington, D.C. in 1961. And he founded that organization because he was fired from his job at the Army Map Service in 1957 because he was determined to be gay. So he founded his organization in 61. He worked with Barbara Giddings. They led the first protests in front of the White House in the mid-1960s. So they were very active before this effort to remove homosexuality from the list of mental illnesses. Katie, can you play the second clip from Barbara Giddings? Again, it'll set the context for what we're talking about.
From 1967, when I made my first public lecture to a straight audience, and I had to deal constantly with people's conviction that we were sick simply because they had heard some psychiatrists say so, or they had heard a report of the infamous Bieber study, that badly flawed study which didn't even get examined critically in the profession, and which got ballyhooed to the public. And that was the one that promoted the idea that gay men become gay because of the absent, distant father and the all-encompassing mother. And you know that idea is, you've heard about that at least. That's still around. Well, that came strictly out of the Bieber study. It was a really bad piece of work. And yet it had such impact and such control over our destinies. Once we were able to get rid of the sickness label, we could stop paying attention to the Biebers and the Haddons and who was the other one? Vandenhag was not a medical psychoanalyst. He was a non-medical psychoanalyst.
Only half bad. He only said we had an hour station of development.
Right.
But even the churches deferred to the shrinks.
Yes.
We kowtowed to them. They abdicated totally. They didn't say we were immoral. They said we were sick.
Oh, and now they say we're immoral.
Right. Now we're immoral.
But at least that's arguable.
Right.
Whereas the problem with the sickness label is that supposedly is scientific and not subject to dispute.
And what Barbara and Kay and Frank were arguing was, we're the experts in ourselves. Listen to us. Don't listen to the psychiatrists. They don't know what the they're talking about. And that started, earlier than the 1960s and 70s. Most of you have probably heard of Dr. Evelyn Hooker, who conducted the first study comparing gay men to straight men in the 1950s. And it was revolutionary. People didn't want to hear it because they just assumed that gay people were sick. So I will now turn this back to Robert. I just love hearing these voices out of the past, and I had the privilege of sitting with Barbara and Kay and Frank and hearing their stories. And we produced a 3-part series, by the way, on the 50th anniversary of the removal of homosexuality from the list of mental illnesses, which can be found at makinggayhistory.org or wherever you get your podcasts. It was season 13 for Making Gay History.
And we will send around resources at the end, by the way, to everyone who is attending today. So you'll have the links to Cured and Eric's work and others.
And Robert, just to add, I'm sorry, Robert, toward the end of our discussion, I have one more clip from Barbara, which you'll hear, where she talks about the impact of the removal of homosexuality from the list of mental illnesses. So that'll come late at the end of our conversation.
Great. Next, we have Gina Chua, who is a transgender activist and executive editor of Semafor. So, Gina, listening to all this, how is this similar, different from what's going on today, you think, in terms of depathologization and et cetera? I think you're on mute.
Thanks. I'll just correct one thing. I do not use an activist term that gets in the way of being a journalist, but I'm certainly trans, and if being an activist means wanting to actually have a life, then I guess I'm guilty. Yeah, I mean, I think all of you realize we are in week 7 of this administration, and the number of executive orders and actions taken have been a flood, right? From attempts to cancel healthcare for allegedly minors, but actually reaching into the age of 19, discharging military service people who have exemplary records, to changes in passports. There's a long list of things that are happening, and it really does hark back in sort of this eerie parallel to this time, with one sort of difference. Back 50 years ago, the attempt was to change the medical establishment to sort of to get it to recognize that that being gay was not an illness. And when that, and I'm going to oversimplify dramatically, and you all are the experts, and when that was accomplished, that opened up many more floodgates, because there was more of at least at the time, I think, an understanding, or at least a deference to authority. And the issue there was trying to change authority. The issue we have now is that, in fact, the medical establishment, by and large, understands that being trans is not a pathology. There is a medicalization of the condition, I guess, and that's something we can talk about. But by and large, all of the major mainstream medical organizations understand what treatment looks like, and in fact, it's the erosion of their authority that we're now looking at, where where governments are attempting to overturn that. And they're building out either different narratives, in the case of, say, the Caste Review in the UK, or in the case of various states like the Florida Department of Health, Board of Health, and so there's a sort of a slightly different battle going on about trying to I guess litigate who has the right to discuss this, and it brings us into a much broader, I think, rabbit hole of essentially turning to authorities to validate your existence. And I think that is a very dangerous trap, and it's frankly a trap that the community has fallen into as well, where we cite medical research to explain why we should get treatment, cite medical research to explain why we are, quote, normal. And that turns on how that medical research can go. So I do see this very interesting parallel over the fight 50 years ago and a similar but different fight at this point. And I think that the final thing I'll just add to this is that even as the medical authorities, I think, are losing some of their, I don't know whether the word is cachet, or their authority to speak on behalf of communities like ours, is that it is those authorities are being used to drive the broader narrative change. And I think that is one of the most difficult and insidious things that we're looking at when we see the support for marriage equality went from about, I think, a quarter of the population maybe about 25 years ago to about 70-something% now, which is an astonishing change in a single lifetime. Support for changing gender is hovering at about slightly under 50%, and frankly, 2 years ago it dropped by 4 points before recovering. And I see that the broad challenge of beyond the medical and legal struggle is the narrative struggle for cultural understanding. And I think that remains one of our biggest challenges today.
Gina, may I ask you a question? And Gina and I are, just for the record, Gina and I are friends outside of this conversation. and also both Columbia Journalism School graduates, and both have labored under being called activists even when we're just trying to live. This happens to me all the time, Gina.
Activist is a compliment.
No, but as a journalist, it's a dirty word. It's a dirty word, and I would be on television shows in the 80s and the 90s, and they would say activist Eric Marcus, and that just completely undercuts you as a journalist. But Gina, I'm curious what it feels like to live through this. So I recall living through times when we were still called sick and sinful, even if the APA had decided we were not. What is it like for you to live through this period?
Well, I was going to say I have Eric and I have other friends who have gone through different periods of greater and less acceptance, and I just for the record, so I transitioned publicly, announced my transition at the end of 2020, and so I have very nice friends who sort of counsel me through this period and call me a baby gay. Or a baby queer, just so that's like, you don't know what it's like. You should have been around at our time. It's an incredibly difficult time. And I think that, for those of us who have believed that the arc of history bends towards justice, to see it turn the other way and as suddenly as it has, and not simply because of this administration, because in fact this has been happening for the last 5 to 10 years, when the last statistic I quoted, to walk down the street and sort of understand that statistically speaking, every other person does not think I should exist, is quite a sobering thought, to say the least. And as you sit, and as my friends sit and think about the spaces that we are being squeezed out of, you can't go to the bathroom, or you can't get a passport, or you can't get your medication, and the walls feel, frankly, like they are closing in. They affect people differently, obviously, and I'm privileged to be in New York and in a relatively safe space and so on, but it is a situation where I think you sit and you see every day something new is coming, and you wonder how it will affect you. And it is both the fact that it is moving in the, if you like, the opposite direction, and that it is getting, and that the pace of change is rapid, that I think is very disconcerting for all of us.
So I'm going to turn to Tia next, but before I do that, I just want to let everyone know who's listening that we see this as an interactive session. So please ask questions in the Q&A, and we'll be returning to questions soon. So please do not be shy. So Tia, you are one of the wonderful bioethicists here in America, and there are clearly many ethical issues. You also have been an ally, so to speak, on a lot of these issues. Any thoughts on what we've heard so far, and things you think that bioethicists or physicians or others could do?
Yeah, so many thoughts. I think really building on Gina's comments, it's so interesting, this issue of medicalization. There certainly are perils to it, but what's happening now is kind of the opposite of that. I'm not quite sure what to call it, but there is kind of a perversion of medicalization, a demedicalization, if you will, in the executive orders by Trump, in other kinds of actions. There's a sort of theft of medical and scientific language and the authority that comes, rightly or wrongly, with having studied those things, and twisting terms and assigning them a definition that is not their definition in scientific and medical discourse, just sort of saying this is what biology says, when indeed that is not at all the case. So this is it's not brand new, obviously. There have always been people pounding tables saying whatever, evolution doesn't exist or anything, but it's just bizarre. And I think it's part of, and so why would you do that? It's part of an interesting phenomenon where there is to be no voice but that of Trump. There is to be no idea that is not consistent with the ideas of the administration. And I think that's why that's how I understand this sort of bizarre notion that he should be the head of the Kennedy Center. This is a man who's never expressed any interest in the arts. It's just that artists, it's just a pesky thing about them. They are always speaking their mind. They are always coming up with provocative narratives that may not be in service of the dominant narrative. So we've got to get rid of that voice. I think that's why attack universities. It's certainly not anti-Semitism. This is the administration that is all gung-ho for the rising neo-Nazi party in Germany. This is, anti-Semitism is not really the hill they're going to die on. I mean, that's not really core to their beliefs. There's something about, and neither is free speech, because you can only have free speech if you agree with them. This is the opposite of free speech. So what's going on with this? I think there's two things. One is trans people, in fact, don't really exist for this administration. They are a symbol. They are a way of creating fear. And this administration is brilliant at creating fear against people of color, against all kinds of people who don't agree with them. But trans people are, being a relatively small group, they don't have a lot of voting power, you know? I mean, so it's sort of, and certainly trans children have no voting power. That's a perfect group to victimize because they can't really make a dent at you. And so you get everyone to agree this is a group. You probably don't know any real ones, so you know, or maybe you do or don't. But we can tell you what this group is like, and we can make you hate them, such that any action against them is completely justified. So it's a demonization, and that's what this bullying is. But the other piece of it, and the other goal for all bullying everywhere, is to show even people that agree with you, this could be you. This is what I do to anyone who doesn't agree with me. So I make an example and I show what can be done. I can take away your passport. I can throw you out of the military. I can put your job at risk. I can put your children at risk. I can do all kinds, anything I want, I can do to you. And everybody else sit up and take notice. So I think as an ethicist, it is really distressing to see so little pushback. I appreciate that the universities are in trouble because they rely on federal money. I'm going to tell you now something that may or may not get me in trouble. Where is the APA? Where is the American Psychiatric Association? We're talking about 50 years ago, taking a really, actually pretty bold step, good for them, and saying, you know what, the data don't show it. We don't think this. We were wrong. We're changing the DSM. We're going to take homosexuality out. And in recent years, all of the major medical associations have said gender fluidity, gender identity, these are real items. Treatment is appropriate. We're going to talk about how to get that. We support it. We don't support conversion therapy. We, all of the medical institutions really fell into line. And I think that's part of why the executive order in any administration is completely shut out any medical professional opinion on this stuff because they know they don't agree. They know that this is actually not what medicine and what biology support. So I'm really sorry that there's not, from my own organization, the American Psychiatric, I'm really sorry there's not a statement. I've been trying to find out why there isn't one and what could be done. What I would like to see, and what's not there yet, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's in the works, I've looked and haven't found it so far, is to say this is a human rights issue. This is about respecting the dignity of different kinds of people. It's not about women in sports. If you want to talk about that, fine. As Charlie Baker, the former governor of Massachusetts, later was the ACAA director, estimates there are roughly 10 trans athletes in the ACAA. It's not really an overwhelming issue. It doesn't deserve the attention it's getting. It's not what it's about. It's about holding up an effigy and showing what your brutal power can do. And we need statements saying, this is a human rights issue. We need to stop this. We need to stop attacking this group. And I don't know, to answer Gina's question, is that medicalization? I don't know, but I think we owe the LGBT community a debt. We have, as psychiatrists, as physicians, in the past, we were part of the enforcement arm against LGBT people. And it's nice that we took it out of the book 50 years ago. That doesn't erase our obligation to say trans people do exist. We, in the past, said gay people shouldn't be in the military. We now need to say a competent soldier, we need more of those. We actually have trouble recruiting for our armed forces. I don't know why you would want to get rid of capable soldiers who are also trans. We don't support that. We object to it. So I'll just, I feel very strongly about this issue, as I know many of us do. I'll stop there, but those are some of the thoughts.
Well, thank you. So I just want to say we have in the audience a few psychiatrists who've been very involved in this issue. One is Jack Drescher, who just wrote in the Q&A posting the APA statement on gender dysphoria and military readiness, which is from 2 weeks ago. And I'll just read the last line. The data do not support the general conclusion that a diagnosis of gender dysphoria precludes an individual from meeting these standards of the rigorous mental and physical demands of military service. I'm wondering, Jack, and there's some other psychiatrists, if the APA might do more than that. I mean, it's great to issue a statement, but I don't know where that gets sent, or should that be sent more broadly, et cetera. We have a few wonderful questions coming in. Please ask questions. I just want to see if any of our other panelists want to comment on what we've heard. Ron, you want to comment on the notion of demedicalization? I think you're on mute, Ron.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I think there's a really interesting issue here. Obviously, the current assault on trans people is part of a reactionary cast to American culture and politics. It's very, very frightening. It's so frightening that it's hard to really understand. But I think we have to address an issue that they've seized upon as a way of magnifying this issue. There is a question about whether young kids who feel dysphoric should undergo biological transformations while they're young. And the thing that's so stunning about it is that the Cass report in the UK was not written by a homophobic lunatic. It was written by one of the leading doctors about pediatrics in England. And there are other countries in Europe where the question of whether or not to initiate trans biological treatments in adolescence is justifiable. So I think if we don't address that issue, if we treat it as if it's a completely reactionary piece of, we're in trouble, because there's a world out there of not homophobics who are raising questions about this. And I don't hear it from the American community.
Can I pitch in on that one fairly quickly? Yes. And I am certainly I'm not the medical professional here, and there are plenty of those in the room, and so I'm sure they can all jump in on me afterwards. One, Hilary Cass, I believe, is a pediatrician, although she's never actually treated any trans people. I think if you look at some of the data in the Cass report, you'll see that they have some of the best long-term data on children and transition, and there's, I think, in something like 3,000 cases, there's less than 10 people who have detransitioned, and it's not even clear exactly what the cause of it. So I'll just make a couple of really quick points. One is that there is certainly a narrative that Europe is moving away. In fact, Germany just issued a 400-page report affirming gender care for minors. We don't read a lot about that. We tend to read about the Cass report. The Cass report does have its critics, which we don't read a lot about either. But I mean, I will say, look, I've got a 29-year-old and a 24-year-old, and trust me, I don't trust my kids either. I still don't trust my kids. I'm not sure they're all capable of making the right decision. I'm sure my parents feel still the same way about me. The issue on trans care for minors is a pretty fraught one. We all understand that. The issue there is, one, if you look deeply at the at the medical care offered, it is puberty blockers, which are reversible by and large. They're intended to get people up to the age of 17 or 18 when they can make more considered decisions on their own. The discussion is often framed around, and so just two more points. One, the discussion is often framed around making sure that children don't make mistakes, but it's not framed around having parents not be able to make decisions for their children because the bans come in. And so if you are a parent, and you can imagine if you're a parent of a child that you believe that your doctor says needs a certain treatment and the state bans the treatment, it's not framed in terms of parental rights, which it should be, not least because parental rights seem to be the rallying cry. The other thing I would just say is that it is true that people worry about minors making decisions that they come to regret, and I understand that entirely. And you will read a story or read a case about a person who has gotten medical treatments that they come to regret, and they have a deep voice and no breasts and facial hair and a body that they do not recognize, and your heart goes out to them. And you very rarely read the story of the person who has a deep voice, no breasts, facial hair, and a body they don't recognize, and they have that because they were not given treatment. And so the framing of what is normal is the critical issue here, not the treatment. If you believe that children should all grow up a certain way. And just one final thing. I have glaucoma. I'm going blind slowly. It is normal. Luckily, there's a treatment developed by a doctor at Columbia, by the way. So I'm not going blind slowly. It's arrested. But it's normal. And you can make the case that, you should let nature take its course. And then maybe I'll discover that blindness is okay. And if there's a treatment, I can have it later on. That's not the way we work in medicine. Again, you are the doctors, not me. And I think a lot of it comes down to the idea of what is normal, what is medically necessary. And I think this is the debate that we're really having, not what is necessarily right for any individual kid and who should decide that. Sorry, I just shut up now.
No, that was wonderful. Barbara?
I just want to actually support what Gina just said and add that these are not, we like to put things yes or no, black and white, but actually what these kids need are support. And what has happened here in New York City, that we closed their support, right? In response to the current culture, we closed these centers of support for kids who are experiencing issues around gender. And from an ethics perspective, I don't see how that is the thing that the medical community should be doing, that we should be closing off the support that we have built for them. If anything, we could have I think that there's this fear the federal government will cut off Medicare to the hospital if we don't abide. We could be doing, from an ethics perspective, a better job at combining our resources. All the hospitals in New York City could have said as one, we're not closing, we're not leaving these patients behind, we're not saying that they don't deserve our care. They deserve our care, and we're keeping all of our clinics open. And now you're going to cut Medicare to every new, citizen of New York City. Let's see that happen. But from an ethics perspective, I think I saw one of the first questions was, how do I teach medical students, or how do I teach people who are interested in ethics, is to stay stronger, make a bigger statement. You know what the right thing to do is, so do it. Why are we here today? We're celebrating the strength of people 50 years ago to do the right thing. They're not going to go look back and celebrate that we all caved. No, they're going to celebrate physicians and medicine that sticks with what they know is the case, which is these kids need care and support. These adults need care and support. And that is the thing that needs to happen, I would put out there from the ethics perspective. I also want to say, it isn't, just very quickly, it is an irony to me, and I heard the NCAA guys say that in Congress, that it's 10 out of 500,000 athletes, 10 of them, he thinks, fewer than 10 are trans athletes, that they're so concerned about women in sports, but they have no concern about women's health.
nationwide. So we have hundreds of thousands, millions of women who are getting poor health care. We don't care about that. We care about a couple of teams that may be affected by a couple of athletes. That's what we should be. And I think to Tia's earlier point, that's what's telling you that it's demonization and it's not about something real. Okay, sorry.
No, Barbara, I completely agree with you because as Gina, we were talking, and Ron raised these issues, there are real issues around gender care. But that's not what this is about. This is about a party that recognized an opportunity, as they did in the 80s and 90s and the 50s when it came to gay people. Bush 1, Bush 2, both used gay people as wedge issues because most people, well, at least with Bush 1, most people still didn't know someone who was gay. So you can demonize people when you don't know them and say that they're in the shrubs and let's go back to Nita Bryant in the late 1970s with her Save Our Children campaign. And now we have gay people grooming children. And it's a political issue that has nothing to do with the reality of gay lives, of trans lives. So yes, we can talk about the issues, the real issues around this, but right now we're fighting against people who are using this politically. And that's much harder to deal with than the medical issues.
So I'm going to turn to Tia, and then Ron, I think you want to speak, but you're on mute. So after Tia, I'm going to have you speak if you want. So
Just
Tia,
say one thing.
Okay, good.
The thing that is utterly shameful is that the Lagone Medical Center ordered the cancellation of those appointments for kids and their doctors without ever addressing the issue publicly by saying, we are being compelled by the government to do something we think is unethical and unacceptable. The silence, the complete silence in the face of threats is really scary.
Well said. Tia.
I agree, but I'm really worried about how the clinics could go forward. I'm aware that there are clinicians who are quietly continuing to treat children and that are figuring out workarounds that are part of the resistance and who are figuring out how they can prescribe puberty blockers because these are legal and available drugs. Can you come up with a different indication? Can you see them in your private office and not at the hospital? So I think it's actually very difficult to be that clinician in this period of resistance. And I agree with you, Barbara. I would have liked to have seen the powerful institutions stand up. We are seeing Columbia being slammed, and it won't only be Columbia. There is an attack on the universities, I think, because they are sources of independent opinion and wisdom and views. And they represent also some sort of symbol, the elite, as if these people are not part of the elite who are running these attacks. But I'm not sure. Some people are doing things quietly, and I support the ethicality of that. I support sometimes that you can get more done by being part of the, the sort of whispered, it's okay, let's not have email, call me on the phone, we'll figure out what to do, I'm going to take care of you. And I'm sorry that we're left with that. I'm sorry that more powerful institutions have not stood up and said things. And I thank, by the way, Jack Drescher for putting that comment in. I looked for those statements and I talked to various different people in the leadership who said, well, we're uncomfortable. But it may have been that I looked the last time at the website before February 28th. So I thank you for correcting the record there, Jack. So anyway, in terms of ethics, we do need to be brave and to be courageous. It's okay to do that quietly sometimes. We hope our leaders will stand up, but I salute the people that are quietly getting the work done and doing it without fanfare.
Thank you for that. So we're going to turn to some of the questions that our audience have asked. I just want to make one comment at the Cass report. I was struck that the Cass report was very much misinterpreted in the American media. My read of the Cass report is that it said that simply, quote unquote, that transgender care, gender affirming care was okay as long as it's done as part of research at this point. We need more data. The problem then is, of course, that you can't do it for Trump's executive orders. You can't then do research on it. So but it was seen as being, oh no, there's no evidence it works. And in fact, the Cass report was saying, just we need more evidence. Let's get more evidence. Let's sort of do it, but just, do it as part of research. Not that that is an apology for it by any means. So we have one question here. What advice do you have for talking to parents and siblings who believe that transness equals mental illness? Or is there only one solution, family estrangement? They also still believe that homosexuality is a mental illness, despite that definition being changed in the 70s. What advice do you have for talking to people like this? Is there a specific scientific study I can point them to, or is there no point in sending such a thing? Thank you. Any thoughts on that?
I'll defer to all the people that had to talk to parents or friends about being gay back when there was much more stigma and how they dealt with it. I find the idea, and it's troubling for me as a journalist. I find the idea that presenting people with facts somehow changes their mind, because in fact, oftentimes it doesn't. It's possible, and there are certainly studies I think that you can, but often those studies are appeals to authority, right? If you say that the APA says this, then you have to decide that you believe them, and the problem is the belief in authority has waned dramatically. I find the best way I can try to convince people is appeal to analogy. I do my best to say, if you understand this thing, you might be able to understand that thing. If people say, well, as we've seen in several op-eds from politicians and political analysts, that it makes sense to drop trans people because it's an incredibly unpopular position. And my point is just to say, in 1967, when Loving was decided, less than somewhere between 10 to 20% of the American population believed that interracial unions were moral. And thank God the Supreme Court didn't look at the polling.
Tia?
I love what you said, Gina, about, I love facts. I'm a doctor, but that's probably not what convinces really any of us when we make major decisions in our lives. It's not what determines, what religion you are, whether you're going to marry somebody. We are moved by other things. So I love your use of analogy. I have on occasion had some good luck using the analogy of religion. That's a core part of identity for some people. It's not genetic. We don't really know whether, but it can change over time. But that's a difference that's legally protected. We don't have to agree with you being whatever, Jewish or Catholic or Muslim. We understand that this difference is core to your identity and that you choose it, and that to live as who you authentically are, you need that freedom. Indeed, one of the freedoms upon which this particular country was built. So I think that has, in talking to some neighbors who are quite religious, but actually good and decent people, I think, trying to understand this thing that they had no notion of. It seems so strange to them. I think that was useful. I don't know if it will be useful with everybody, surely not. But I think you're on the right thing with saying, this is an analogy. Perhaps this will help you see how I see this issue.
Eric.
I'm going to defer to Gina first. I'll gladly go second. Go
ahead,
Gina.
I'm just going to glom on to Tia's comment, because it is a fantastic comment. I wish I had thought of it, and I'll just steal it. Which is religion. One of the issues, obviously, with identity is the question about, so at what point does it infringe on other people's rights, right? What is my right to go into is my identity as a trans woman entitle me to go into the women's room and perhaps infringe on women who are in that bathroom? And so I think those have sometimes become a difficult area to navigate, which is slightly different from, you can choose who you want to love, and the state should not intervene. Religion is a wonderful analogy because religion actually allows you, especially in this day and age, to assert a whole set of rights. I don't have to do this. I can't eat that. I have the ability to, in effect, project my belief in a space around me that it requires people to essentially respect that. And so while it's not perfect, I think it's a very interesting analogy. And so I thank you for that.
We have a few questions about gender dysphoria. So gender dysphoria is currently still classified as a diagnosis in the DSM-5. How do you view the balance between recognizing symptoms to ensure access to care and the potential drawbacks of medicalizing feelings around identity? And then do you think this classification will persist in future editions of the DSM, or is there a shift toward redefining or removing it? So gender dysphoria, any thoughts? And Ron, I know historically that was an issue I think you talked about in your book, the fact that the psychiatry removed homosexuality, but kept, I don't know if the term was gender dysphoria, but some other category that some people thought who were perhaps homophobic kept in there.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so yes, the last gasp of the anti-homosexual feeling was, as the DSM was changing, they preserved the notion of ego-dystonic homosexuality. And then ultimately they gave it up because they said that is not a pathology. The problem is, why do people feel that being gay is bad? I wanted to add one thing that's critically important. As I read the literature and the understanding of what happened in the 70s, it was interesting that gay men basically defined their orientation as in some way a biological given. That's the way they were, and that's the way they had to live. Women very often chose the idea that being a lesbian was a choice of women expressing their feminine rights. And I think that's an interesting tension that we ought to think about.
Eric.
This is a long argued issue. In fact, one of my books was called "Is It a Choice? Questions and Answers About Gay and Lesbian People," published a long time ago now. The way I came to answer this question, and I think I answered it this way when I was on Bill O'Reilly's show many years ago, I explained to him, I said, you could choose to have sex with men. It's not your preference. I could choose to have sex with a woman. It's not my preference. So whether or not it's biological basis, it's not hurting anyone if I'm choosing to do what I want to do. And to come back to an earlier point about what will change minds, what will change people, can you help people understand? What I found in the olden days, and I think which was very successful with marriage equality, was letting people know who we are as LGBTQ people. I didn't meet the first person I knew was trans until 9 years ago. And the assumption is because I'm a gay man that I'll understand gender issues. I've become friends with Gina in the last few years. That has transformed how I have come to see trans people. The challenge for trans people is there are so few trans people, there isn't one in every family. But as all of us on this panel can attest, there are gay people, there are gay people in all our families, and some of us are gay ourselves. So as people come to know trans people, I think that's the most effective way. But it's challenging because it's such a small portion of the population.
Here's a question. As we talk about these connections between gay history and trans life today, where was a connection with other minority groups, especially disability and youth rights? When gay people stopped being mentally ill, quote unquote, where'd that leave those who still were? When there is controversy over youth transition today, where does that leave other youth medical procedures without parental consent, which may cause regret, like abortion or vaccination? So any thoughts about how this might relate, our conversation might relate to disability rights, other groups, medicalization, other areas? Ron, any thoughts about that? Or
sorry, I've talked enough.
I disagree, but I'll comment. I think it's a really good question. And I think bioethics has been changed and improved by disability rights, with the focus on nothing, the wonderful phrase, nothing about us without us. And I think that has been part of bioethics, really seeking not to make pronouncements on high, this is the right answer for such and such a dilemma, but looking more towards engaging different participants and finding a solution. As you know, Bob, I'm really into mediation in bioethics, and I think this is one of the great uses of it. It doesn't have to be in every case, but I like that model. So I do think the focus on human rights, on respect, on engaging with a particular person and listening. In our training as psychiatrists, one of the silliest things that was said to me has been one of the most important. The supervisor said, 2 ears, 1 mouth. That's for a reason, So I think just listening to the perspective of someone and trying to respect that and incorporate it is an enormous tool. We can be very helpful in doing that. I think there is an enormous pressure on trans people to talk about their experience, and that's burdensome. That's really tough. But to the extent that it's possible, it is enormously helpful, because most people don't know well someone who is trans. And with Eric, I didn't know anyone well who was trans until my own family member transitioned. So now I'm in the position of someone among those people I love most in all the world is trans. That's a powerful motivator for thinking, what is this thing? How is that going to be? Will this person be happy? Will they have all the opportunities that I would wish them to have? And, it really helps on the learning curve. So I wish that were more possible for more people.
So a few questions about other gay issues. So is it planned that this misadministration, the Trump administration, will outlaw and annul the gay marriages of recent years? What will be the fate of the children of these gay and or transgender families? So gay marriage is also under threat. Any thoughts about that, or where the medical establishment's been, or anyone reading the tea leaves, or thoughts or concerns?
There are a lot of words I could use, but I probably shouldn't. I already used one earlier. Let them just try. But I will tell you that this administration inspired my partner of 31 years, and me, it inspired us to get married, legally married. I don't think they can annul our marriage. They can try to strip the federal rights, and I think they will do everything they can. But as I mentioned a short while ago, there are gay and lesbian people in every family in America, not just Democratic homes. So let's see what happens if they try that. I don't, it wouldn't surprise me if they do. The key here, though, is for people to stand up and fight back. It's all mind-blowing.
Sorry.
I'm not very positive these days about many things, but they have done things I find hard to believe already. But I do find it hard to believe that it would be easy to roll back gay marriage and leave all of the children who are produced in those marriages without. I mean, if you're doing this because you're deeply religious, it should trouble you to pull the societal rug out from children who, by definition, are innocent. Why would you do that? And it would make for any state an enormous amount of difficulty. Who then are the parents? Is that okay? I mean, who has permission to sign for them, get them, treatment that we approve of? So I'm hoping, because it would be an enormous nightmare for the people who did it, that may forestall of movement to dissolve gay marriages. I hope that's true. I don't know if it is.
So here's a question. Could folks reflect on the Colorado case before the Supreme Court? It seems that Colorado is a strong argument for limiting conversion therapy, given the 50 years of delisting homosexuality from the DSM. If anyone's, yes, Barbara.
I'm going to put out a somewhat controversial take on this, and I'm not a lawyer, but conversion therapy doesn't work, and we have lots of evidence to show that. There's plenty of studies that that show it doesn't work. I'm not sure. What's troubling me sometimes is when legislatures start to pick and choose certain medical things that they're making laws about. The problem is that this is a licensed therapist who's using an intervention or promising an intervention that we know doesn't work. That shouldn't have to be a specific law. That should be a malpractice or the licensing board for that therapist should close it down because they're offering a fraudulent effort. And so in that way, I think it should be just like if I offered a magical elixir for your diabetes. I know it does work. We know I'm a fraud. So in that sense, I think what worries me is they're using this case as this, see, we should be able to offer conversion therapy. No, the problem is that we shouldn't be offering things that are fraudulent to people or promising things that don't work. And that really should be the core of it. But I'm not a lawyer, so that has nothing to do with the law.
And I'm not a lawyer either, but I will just say that there are parallels on the flip side of that, right, which is in the Scamedi case, which is Tennessee attempting to restrict gender care for minors on the grounds essentially that it's experimental and so on, which is exactly what Barbara's talking about. What medical intervention should the state regulate and on what? And on what basis? The Scamedi case is interesting, and there's a documentary about it that just came out, Heightened Scrutiny, because the ACLU is not actually arguing they are actually arguing that the law should not stand, but that's not the argument in the Supreme Court. The argument in the Supreme Court is that it is a case of sex discrimination and that heightened scrutiny should be applied to it at the lower court level. To see whether in fact it stands out. But I do think we're in this place where much of what might otherwise be a medical decision or a decision between a doctor and a patient, or a doctor and a minor patient and a parent, is being legislated instead.
So just in response to Barb, what you said, Jack Drescher wrote Free Speech versus State Regulation of Clinical Practice. So I don't know if the
you're a psychiatrist, Bob. Like it's not free speech is one thing if you want to say something outside of your clinical professional thing. Okay, you say your thing, right? But you're a psychiatrist. You can't just free speech it with your patients. You're offering a therapy that's supposed to have some evidence of efficacy. And if it doesn't, that's fraud.
Right.
I agree strongly. I think the free speech is a red herring here. A medical professional does not enjoy pure free speech. Your speech to your patients is actually regulated by what your professional society and the state regulations claim are established treatments that are recognized as appropriate. You can't just sort of say, no, I think that I'm gonna, remove your kidney through your throat. I think that's a really good way to do it. It's just like, you can't, you don't have that free speech. It's not a thing.
I think what Jack was saying was not that the free speech is a legitimate argument in his mind, but that's the argument that opponents will use is, well, a therapist has free speech. And then Jack said in clinical practice, you can't tell a suicidal patient to go ahead and do it.
And I didn't think Jack was saying that either. I did want to say that they're doing it on free speech and freedom of religion. Two things that have nothing to do with being a licensed professional offering what's supposed to be an evidence-based thing. So I know he was sorry. I wasn't meaning to criticize you, Jack. I was sort of just commenting.
So you're getting comments. We must stand up and resist, as Dr. Rothschild tells us. Then someone writes, I'd like to encourage communities to get up and go to their local school board meetings and bring up issues that exist at their schools regarding LGBTQ acceptance and require that schools defend those in their population against unkind behavior at school by educating them. Any thoughts? School boards as being a place? Eric?
I have a comment about education, just because Making Gay History released 14 new lessons, a suite of lessons that we created in partnership with the National Education Association, anchored by, and they're LGBTQ inclusive lessons, anchored by Making Gay History podcast episodes. So one key is to provide the resources that educators need to teach about these issues, about LGBTQ history. And that's how you do also change hearts and minds. And what I'm finding among young people is there is an enormous demand for this information. The problem isn't with younger generations. They seem to get this very clearly. It's older generations using these issues as a political wedge and as a cudgel for their own gain, for gain of power and gain of I don't know what else. But education is absolutely a key piece, and going to school board meetings is also key. And I so admire those young people, especially those young trans people who go to these meetings and speak out forcefully at age 14, age 15. I don't think there's anything more impressive than that. And I hate to see the burden put on those kids, but it is important that they speak up with the support of their families.
So here's a question. I support and admire providers working behind the scenes to continue to care for trans youth. This is T, I think you would comment on this. But what about the moral distress this causes them? Trying to provide the best medical care by cobbling together underground resources is not easy or sustainable for even the best provider. What can we do to minimize this moral distress? Or Tia, do you see the moral distress? Or I don't know if you know providers trying to do this, or what's that like for them at the moment?
So moral distress is a common issue for lots of providers at different times. Certainly during the pandemic, there was enormous moral distress for healthcare professionals and the rest of us. I think for those people who are doing this, their moral distress would be greater if they were not trying to provide workarounds. They feel so keenly the obligation to their patients to continue the treatment or initiate the treatment that they feel their patients want and that they can provide, that they are willing to take significant risks and put themselves in harm's way to do the right thing. So they shouldn't have to do that. And we need to work to make sure that they need not do that any longer than is necessary. I also think if some of these things come to light, there may be pressure on medical licensure boards to somehow withdraw licensing or punish physicians. And we need to make sure that that doesn't happen, that we band together to protect people who are really trying to do the right thing under extremely difficult circumstances. I mean, you can analogize it to people providing abortion during times and in places where it's illegal. Trans treatment is generally, abortion is safe, trans treatment is yet safer. Particularly if we're talking about children, it's, there's everybody gets all upset about surgery, but lots of trans people don't necessarily have that much surgery, and you can be trans and not have any surgery. So that's not the main issue. Most treatments are, why don't you let them change their hair? Why have them adopt a different name? I mean, the social treatments for small children are exactly the place to start. And you know what the great thing about hair is? If you grow it long and later it needs to be short, that's something we can do. So I think information, education, treatment for children goes along a pathway, and the irreversible things come last, if at all, during childhood, for the most part, with some exceptions. And I'll stop, Barbara.
Now, I'm just going to back that up by saying, and I think when the medical community hides the clinics or isn't vocal, then we make it seem as though it's bigger. We make it seem as though it's something we're hiding. And that's another problem for the public, for education. It's as though, you're right, this was bad. We do need to close this. I'm going to just more strongly just say that I think the power in the medical community, meaning the large medical institutions, could definitely do more. It's true that the individual provider is like taking a ton of burden. Thus, all of us as medical people and healthcare professionals should be putting pressure on the large institutions to be more vocal and to protect us, protect healthcare providers. Sorry, Gina, you were saying.
No, so I just wanted to throw in a stat or two. This is based off a KFF Washington Post survey from a couple of years ago. I'm not entirely sure how accurate it is, but only 30-ish% of all trans people, all people who say they're trans, access any medical care at all. That includes, 30-something%, 33, 35%. That includes counseling, right? And so there is not a wave of huge medical, and obviously the people who do need medical interventions do need medical interventions. And on the youth care, again, it starts with social transition. You have puberty blockers. You might go on to cross-sex hormones before you hit your age of majority. The number of surgeries that are performed, on minors is vanishingly small, and mostly top surgery for trans boys. And that, again, based on this KFF study, I think something like 10% of trans women access any surgery, and about 1% of any trans men access any surgery. So the numbers are, in fact, very small on the surgical procedures, even if to some extent the numbers for puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones are probably increasing largely just because of the increase in numbers among youth, which mostly I think you can attribute to not to social contagion, which, by the way, has been debunked as a theory several times, but essentially to greater social acceptance from society.
So first of all, we have a few minutes left. So if people have questions, please feel free to ask questions. One comment I was going to say, so I think hospitals would say that they feel enormous pressure in cutting trans services because they're afraid they're going to lose all their federal funding if they're seen as providing it. So
get together as a group, be collective bargaining. We have huge, very wealthy medical institutions here in Manhattan. If every single one of them got together and said, this is what we're doing, good luck to the federal government at some level. I mean, we serve millions and millions of voters here. I feel like medicine sort of by the symbolism of taking homosexuality off the DSM is so meaningful. And these things are meaningful. Medicine, what we do is meaningful to people. It means something when we take a stand. It says something to the average person, gives them a certain amount of courage too. And I just feel like we're losing our chance. We're not doing what we could do, and we're caving sometimes before we even have to, which is even worse.
Yeah. May I just jump in here, Robert? As I think this is actually a good moment to play that last clip from Barbara Giddings, who talked about the impact of homosexuality being removed from the list of mental illnesses. Katie, you have that last clip, which I hope you can play. This is also a headline from a local paper that I just love. So I'll turn to you for this.
What kind of impact did the change have? The change in listing?
I think.
Do you recall when the vote
Yes, we had a wonderful headline in one of the Philadelphia papers. 20 million homosexuals gain instant cure. And a picture of me and some little interview with me in the story, but it was basically about the vote. It was a front page story, and I was thrilled with it. Mm-hmm. And exactly, we were cured overnight by a stroke of the pen, just as originally we'd been made sick by probably a stroke of the pen. Mm-hmm. Now, the effects were not necessarily felt overnight, but you could see that by the end of the 70s, some 6 or 7 years after the decision in APA, we were no longer putting so much energy into fighting the psychiatrists and the sickness label.
And today it's hardly talked about.
It's hardly talked about. Now it's okay. I'd rather. No, but I would. You can argue with people in a way. You can argue with people who say that you're immoral because you can say, look, there's so many kinds of morality. Mm-hmm. There are no absolutes. And you and I will agree on most things, and we will disagree on this one, but you can't enforce your morality on me. The sickness label supposedly had the cachet of indisputable science, mm-hmm. which made it a lot harder to deal with with the general public.
That's right.
It was easy for people to say, oh, those people are sick. And now they had to come up with other reasons. And now they're coming out with more basic reasons. I don't like you. I don't like the way you live. I think you're immoral. I think you're rotten. Well, all of that is more honest than this nonsense about you're sick.
I just loved Barbara's certainty. She was a force of nature. And we have full episodes with Barbara and Kay and with Frank Kameny. And those voices are important. And I sometimes wonder, where are they now? Or is it just so hard to break through with how things have changed, with how we consume news and information?
Well, I think we have a few voices on the call with us here today, but including yours. So here's a question. I continue to work with trans clients, this is a mental health professional, who are now struggling to determine if they need to detransition for the safety of themselves and their families. I'm working to help them make these life-altering decisions while weighing the costs, as many of them feel incredibly suicidal when even thinking of pretending to be that which they are not. Beyond helping them to find more subtle ways to be themselves and remain safe, do you have recommendations?
Bob?
Yes.
Ron, I actually have to add something. I've been quiet for a while, but I think in some way the focus of our meeting today, obviously important, is in a way sidelining the fact that we're living in a moment that is enormously threatening to democracy and liberty. It's not trans issues. It's not gay issues. They are trying to silence us all. And it's not a matter of being brave. We don't have a way of standing up against what is, in fact, very close to a fascist emergence. And if we don't acknowledge that, we'll be fools.
Agreed. So what should we do?
Massive demonstrations, not hundreds, not a few thousand here and there, but hundreds of thousands in the street.
Well, I would say I think it's of note that just 3 days ago was the first time that Trump's disapproval ratings were higher than his approval ratings. In other words, his approval ratings remain the same, but the disapproval since his inauguration have gone up, and now more than the approval. Of course, the stock market's been going down. So I think those are things that may help. But, there have been demonstrations. They don't seem to have thus far had a big effect. I mean, I agree with you. And we need more active. And this gets back to what you were saying, where are the Frank Kemenys today? Where is the pushback?
Well, and the pushback is emerging. And I'm curious, Gina, you are on the front lines of journalism right now at Semafor. What are you seeing? What are you seeing?
I think what I see is that we are 7 weeks in. And we're 7 weeks in. And that, whatever happens, I think no one expects there to be any sort of real reaction or any considered reaction time. I think it's a little unrealistic. I mean, I'm not saying this is a wonderful time for trans people or gay people or various other groups of people, but I think it's given the. If you had asked me before the inauguration, what I would expect, this is not what I would have said. I'm very good at catastrophizing, but this is a little beyond what I would have expected, and I think it's a little. I don't think it's quite fair to say nobody knows what to do yet, because I think this is so unprecedented that I suspect that in the weeks and months to come there'll be a more formulated, considered response from various groups. But I just think that on the speed and scale of everything, which I think Steve Bannon very concisely summed up with, it's muzzle velocity. You flood the zone, and the zone has been flooded, and I think people are having difficulty processing, and I think that will perhaps that will abate at some point, and I think that's when you'll start to see a different response. But right now, I think there's a lot of flailing about, and there's a lot of if you like, passion without direction, and we'll see. I don't know. Tia.
We no longer have the luxury of being shocked. Being shocked suggests that we didn't expect it. We now know what's happening.
I want to comment, if I can, toward the specific comment from the therapist who's working with clients who are thinking of detransitioning. I'm not surprised, but I'm so sorry to hear that there are people who are thinking that that's what they must do. I really, I am not doing that work now, so I can't tell you what would be best to do. But I do think, in general, that support for somebody being who they understand themselves to be is the first ingredient for safety for them. I know that there are threats of other kinds, but you actually do need to feel that you are living your life authentically. And I hope that the trans people that this therapist is working with are given that message. It may be that they can delay some steps, maybe, they feel they're putting someone else in an awkward position. But this is incredibly important, that you be able to own your identity. And it's not a small thing. And I'm wishing strength for them and confidence, and for you also in supporting them. So I didn't want to leave that very poignant and moving question kind of hanging in the air. It's just exactly what we all need to figure out, how we're going to help people who are on the cusp of making such a difficult decision.
Barbara, do you want to add something?
I just wanted to say that, first of all, I'm blown away by the questions. So this is a wonderful panel, but it's also a great audience. And I also want to say, and it's great to have so many people interested and on, that Tia's comment reminds me sometimes when I'm teaching ethics that real people are deeply affected by the things that are going on, by the things that, taking the 20 million cured. But there were many, many people, I'm sure, who, when this was taken off the DSM, felt better about themselves, felt like society was better with them, felt more courage on a very individual level. And, certainly as healthcare providers, patients are first, and their needs and their health. And we should, that our political movement should also reflect that value, which is we are here to serve patients and to protect them if we can. So just wanted to sort of put that out there as a support to what Tia said. I'm glad she, identified something in the chat that really is a very personal and significant comment.
So we just literally have a minute left or so, but here's one question, just the last question. What is the best way to communicate with elected officials to stand up for trans people and speak out against harmful legislation?
I called my senators yesterday. I called my senators today.
Okay.
I mean, it's the least you can do.
The least you can do. All right. And I should say we have people on the call from all over the country and all over the world, actually, someone from Venezuela, et cetera. So I think wherever we are, there are elected officials to reach out to. Any final comments from our panelists? If not, I want to thank our panelists for an extraordinary discussion, a moving, poignant, powerful, inspiring. And I want to thank everyone who joined us in the audience, and thank you for your questions. And I just want to make a comment that we have some other upcoming events you might find of interest. And I should say that we will send out information. This is about the Eric's program, and also Cure, the documentary that we heard about. And we also have several events. As I say, this is sponsored by the Master's of Bioethics program. We have courses in gender and sexuality and ethics, reproductive ethics, clinical ethics that Barbra teaches, global bioethics that I teach. We have a few other events coming up about end-of-life treatment, and Harriet Washington and others talking about our program. Check out our website. We have links to prior events we've had, conversations with Tony Fauci and others. And we'll be sending a link out to this event. And as I said, we'll also be sending out some other resources. And if you have resources you'd like to share on these issues, we have a number of people who are involved in these issues. Please send them to us, and we'll include that as much as we can, the information we sent out. So on that, unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you so much, everyone. Go forth and respond. So there's room for change. Thank you all so much. Take care. Be well. Good night.